Skyblock is a hard game. The vast world you spawn in is diminished to only a few islands, and the fun task of exploring it becomes a nightmare with the void staring at you 24/7. Resources are limited, and gathering them is 10 times harder than usual. Add on to the fact that I decided to play this hardcore while on an iPhone, and you have a recipe for a disaster. And in today's video, I'm going to show you how I went from this to this within the span of just 100 days of Minecraft. So to begin our journey, we start things off on a very hectic day 1. On this day, I quickly dismantled my starting island while scavenging all the resources I could, grass included. I temporarily expanded my base with the dirt I got, then set up a cobblestone farm to replace the floor with mob-proofing cobblestone slabs. I only needed a little bit of dirt for my wood farm at the moment, so I decided to use the rest to hopefully get some more grass and some mob spawns in the future. The rest of that day was spent at the cobblestone farm to get more blocks to visit some of the nearby islands. Now at this point of the video, some of you are probably wondering why I seem to be in such a rush. And well, you see, this isn't my first attempt at this challenge. No, no, no. It's actually my 7th. And some of you may be like, oh my god, he died 6 times in Skyblock, he sucks! Which is pretty true. A lot of my attempts ended because of stupid mistakes, but by far the two biggest reasons were the fact that food was limited and phantoms being able to spawn on day 1. Now some of you may have noticed this already, but the in-game day counter says it's day 9, and that's because this is a downloaded map. The map maker BioJohn, you should sub to him by the way, presumably spent 9 days making this world and did not sleep whatsoever, allowing 2017's mistake to thrash me around like a toddler. But that wasn't going to happen this time because I had a plan. Since this wasn't my first attempt, I knew what some of the nearby islands had in store for me. And on day 2, I used all the cobblestone I gathered to visit 2 islands, the Mangrove and Jungle Islands. Although both islands had some pretty useful loot like bamboo and sugarcane, by far the most important items from them were the jungle saplings and water. And if you couldn't tell already, to solve my current crisis, I'm going to be building a mob farm. But it couldn't just be the generic mob farm you've seen from like 7 years ago. It had to be a massive and efficient one that I could use throughout this challenge. And that's where these items came in. Thanks to the water from the mangrove island, I could now make an infinite water source which would be helpful in pushing the mobs into the kill chamber. And as for the jungle saplings, they grow into massive trees when placed in a 2x2 area, which would make gathering blocks so much easier. But obviously, that was still a few days off since I had nowhere near enough resources for that project at the moment. So I spent the rest of day 2 dismantling the jungle island for dirt that could be used to expand my tree farm. And from there, I spent the next 2 days gathering a bunch of materials and expanding my base to accommodate the mob farm. And by day 4, I could finally start building the farm. Now this mob farm is mainly divided into 4 parts: the kill chamber, the water platform, the spawning areas, and the roof. The kill chamber and water platform only took about a day or 2 to finish, but the next part, the spawning areas, were by far the most time consuming. Each layer was organized in a checker formation, with each spawning platform being 2x2 blocks. Said platforms are also surrounded with buttons to fool the mobs into voluntarily meeting their demise. I could only build 1 layer a day since I didn't want phantoms being my reason for an 8th attempt, and since I wanted 6 layers for good rates, I spent the next few days building in the morning and grinding at night. Thankfully, nighttime proved that the mob farm was working, so there was no need for any massive redos at all throughout the project. And after making a very simple roof, the mob farm was technically completed on day 12. I say technically because this thing was not automatic just yet since I didn't have access to iron for hoppers, meaning that I had to manually kill the mobs and pick up the items. But that didn't mean it was worthless. The reason why I sought this piece of technology out so much was for its loot. You get armor, tools, and apparently dirt from zombies, which are very valuable at this point of the challenge. You also get bones from skeletons, string for wool from spiders, and most importantly, food in the form of rotten flesh. Not to mention that with the mob farm providing me with shelter, there was no need to worry about phantoms anymore, meaning that from here on out, it was smooth sailing. Except, that was a lie. While survival was no longer an issue, if I wanted to make any more progress in this world, I would need to get villagers. But since villages didn't exist in this world, the only way for me to get them would be to cure a zombie villager. And to do that, I would need a golden apple and a potion of weakness. The problem with that though is that both would be a big hassle to get, especially the golden apple. While the mob farm occasionally spawns zombies wearing golden armor, and smelting them would get me 1 gold nugget, I would need 8 gold ingots for a single golden apple. And if I wanted to do some breeding, I would need 2 golden apples, meaning that I would need a grand total of 144 golden nuggets, aka 144 gold armor pieces. And at the time, I thought that killing mobs for gold was the most realistic plan since I didn't know there was an island that had obsidian for a nether portal. So I ended up wasting day 13 ignorantly hacking away at the mob farm while doing chores and discovering why spiders are every farm designer's nightmare. I tried fixing the spider issue with slabs, and while it seemed to have an effect, it didn't really solve the problem entirely. Fortunately, I realized how unrealistic gathering 144 armor pieces was the next day and decided to make my farm semi-automatic with campfires. While I wouldn't be getting XP and armor any longer, it was definitely easier in my mind to just pick up the items. But of course, without armor, I would need to find an alternative source of gold. So I spent days 14 to 16 exploring the islands I hadn't been to yet. The birch, mushroom, and acacia islands didn't really have anything useful in them, while the dark oak island didn't even give me enough saplings for a single tree. Fortunately, I was able to get a pumpkin and a spruce tree sapling from the snow island, which somewhat lightened my mood. But by far the most useful islands were the desert and the lush slash dripstone islands. The desert island not only had the very scarce amounts of sand in this world, but also chests with a bunch of goodies, including the long awaited obsidian that I could use to go to the nether and solve my gold problem. On the other hand, the lush slash dripstone island was interesting to say the least. When I arrived at the island, I was really confused what it was supposed to be, but after digging down, I found out that the island had a skeleton and a zombie spawner, which, I don't know, would have been good to know like 3 days ago, but who cares? It's not like I wasted 3 hours building the mob farm and almost lost all my progress because of this surprise death trap. But luckily, the near death experience was worth it since there was a god apple in the chests. Thank you, Biojon. Anyways, after using the dirt from my mob farm to expand the grass patch, I decided day 17 was the day I visited the nether, because as dangerous as the nether is in hard mode, gold is so common there to the point that I could ruin the world's economy. And after abusing bedrock conditions' broken fire sped mechanics, I entered the portal and to my surprise, was met with the void once again. Okay, now I know that this is called Skyblock and all, but couldn't that have just been applied to the overworld? Like that would have made my job so much easier. I could have just grabbed some nether gold and made my golden apples. But no, the map creator just had to competently stick to the theme of the map, and now I have to think up another way to get gold. But on the bright side of things, I don't need to worry about dying immediately anymore since there weren't a lot of places mobs could spawn. So after making a safe area around my nether portal, I decided to visit some of the nearby islands. Now I couldn't see them with the fog and all, but thankfully they were all found in directions of the nether portal sites. The warped and crimson islands didn't really have anything useful in them, but the soul sand island surprisingly had nether wart and bone blocks on it. Unfortunately, the fourth site I checked had no island, but that was when I realized that I could make a zombie pigman farm to get my 16 gold. So from day 70 to 19, I got to work on making the said farm on this empty side of the nether. I went with a simple design wherein I used a few buttons and a few spawning platforms to fool the zombie pigmen into falling to their deaths. I also added a small slab roof at the top layer to prevent ghasts from spawning. And with that done, all that was left to do was to AFK. Except I couldn't. While the farm was definitely working, there were so many things preventing me from just doing nothing. For one, magma cubes would spawn every so often, and not only do they not take fall damage, but they also ruin the rates of the farm, meaning that I have to eliminate them ASAP. There were also piglins that were playing Fortnite or something because they just wouldn't stop 360 no-scoping me before their inevitable demise. I also had to manually pick up the items because again, I had no access to hoppers. Oh, and did you know that zombie pigmen don't have a 100% chance to drop a gold nugget upon death? Because I didn't, I legitimately had my hopes and dreams crushed every time they didn't drop one, knowing that I'd have to stay for another godforsaken minute in this hellhole. And after more than 2 hours of this nightmare, 2 hours, I finally had my 16 gold and could quickly leave the nether. Now, insanity aside, with the golden apple secured, I immediately began the task of getting a weakness potion. And for those of you who don't know, witches have a 25% chance of throwing a weakness potion at you, meaning that I could abuse this feature to get some villagers. And more importantly, not have to stay in the nether looking for a nether fortress. Now going to this, I thought this was going to be easy. I had a farm producing mobs 24/7, which should have made this the easiest part of the process. Except of course, it wasn't. Now don't get me wrong, getting the zombie villagers and witches was easy, but ironically the hardest part of the entire thing was getting the witch to survive. You see, in Minecraft, harmful potion effects have the opposite effect on undead mobs, meaning that potions thrown by a witch shouldn't deal any damage to zombies. But for whatever reason, despite them not receiving any damage, zombie villagers still attack the witch, and because it can't deal any damage back, the witch just dies. And I kid you not, the witch died so many times that I actually lost count. This took an embarrassingly long time to do, to the point that while waiting for witches to spawn, I was able to do a bunch of chores, make a lava farm, make a simple auto smelter to get some gold, move my cobblestone generator, and set up a massive potato farm with all the dirt and bone meal I got from my mob farm. And even when I was able to safely capture the witch, it took forever to get it to throw a weakness potion. Like it's 25%! It shouldn't take me an entire day to do this. But thankfully, on day 38, it finally threw it, and I got my two villagers, marking the end of this tiresome task. Now at this point of the video, all that there was left to do was to grind. There are so many things you could use villagers for, but what I needed the most right now were their trades and their ability to spawn iron golems for an iron farm. And to kill two birds with one stone, I decided to use an iron farm designed by Prowl. I've used this exact farm design before in my hardcore world, so I won't go into too much detail as to how it works. But before I started that project, I made sure to make these two pain in the ass villagers into farmers that had potato, apple, and golden carrot trades, which also meant goodbye to my healthy diet of rotten flesh. And before you ask, I'm using a texture pack that looks into the hidden trades of a villager, and while some of you may think it's cheating, it's honestly such a big time save that I highly recommend you use it. Anyways, on day 39, I started expanding my base to accommodate the iron farm. I decided to place it near my mob farm so that both would be active while I'm nearby. Setting up the basic infrastructure took around 3 days to accomplish, but once that was done, I moved the villagers in on day 42. And in Bedrock Edition, you need at least 20 beds and villagers for an iron farm to work, and for the design I was using, I would need 40 of them. Thankfully, the string I had stockpiled from my mob farm was enough to make all the beds I needed, which allowed me to begin the breeding process on the same day. So while waiting for the villagers to all grow up, I made sure to take this time to distress myself by doing the usual chores. But obviously doing just that wasn't enough to pass the time, so I made sure to take out my pent-up stress on the wandering trader's llamas. I also expanded my base for a massive pumpkin and melon farm along with a small area for bone mealing sugarcane. Another thing to note was that on day 48 I had the big brain idea of bartering the gold I got from smelting armor to piglins for a chance at getting gravel that I could use to make fletchers, which luckily paid off. I also got some quartz which was going to be handy later on. So once day 49 was upon us, I was fully prepared to finish the iron farm since all the needed villagers had finally grown up. I started by making capsules for them, then slowly but surely getting them into their slots. This was quite a tedious process since villagers tend to gather near their beds at nighttime, making moving them really only possible in the morning. I temporarily made most of my villagers into farmers to get the farm running, which thankfully worked. I also made sure to convert 4 of my villagers into fletchers and one of them into a librarian that sold me bookshelves for more lecterns in the future. And from there, I spent so many days just grinding villager trades and upgrading my gear. Like villagers are so overpowered that I kind of understand why Mojang is thinking of nerfing them. But to keep this section short, here are the highlights. On day 51, I finally added hoppers to my mob farm, making it completely automatic. On day 53, I bought a diamond hoe and added fortune 3 onto it to optimize potato farming. On day 54, I bought a diamond axe and added silk touch to it to optimize melon farming. On day 56, I completed my first set of diamond armor. On day 57, I made a nearly perfect diamond sword. And lastly, on day 59, I made a micro sugarcane farm with the quartz I got the other day and made a maxed out infinity bow from all the bows I got from my mob farm. Now that I had decent enough gear, I decided it was about time I returned to the Nether to look for a fortress. But there was one problem. I had no idea where it was. In any other normal world, this wouldn't have been a big deal since all the player would have to do is waste hours of their life traversing the Nether's terrain. But since the map maker made the Nether mostly void, I could end up spending the rest of the video just looking for it with no luck. And considering what 3 hours of AFKing in the Nether did to me earlier, I wasn't looking forward to it. So in anticipation of this long journey, I made sure to expand my tree farm and cut down plenty of spruce trees to bridge in the Nether. And luckily enough, I didn't even need to bridge that far since the fortress was actually a lot closer than I imagined, which I thought was a good thing until I noticed one fact. Why are there so many mobs? Well, let me give you a brief explanation as to how mob spawning works. For a mob to naturally spawn in your world, they need a solid block underneath them to come into existence. But Minecraft can't just have them endlessly spawning since that would make your gadget a portable microwave. So to solve this, Minecraft added in what's called a mob cap that would limit the number of mobs that can spawn in your vicinity. Normally, Nether Fortresses don't have this many mobs in them since there are plenty of them outside of it. But in my case, there are no places for mobs to spawn other than inside the fortress since the rest of the nether is just void, leading to this horrifying scene before me. Luckily, I was still able to explore the fortress thanks to my recently upgraded gear and the torches I brought to spawn-proof the area. But even then, I almost died so many times. So the loot better be worth it! I take back everything I said. Another thing to note is while I was there, I made sure to get a bunch of blaze rods and enough wither skulls for a wither since I did have plans of spawning one in this video. And on day 61, I returned home to sort out my items and make some fire resistance potions so that I could have an easier time while exploring the nether fortress. While waiting, I also made a small netherwort farm for future use. Once I was done making my preparations, I made my way back to the nether fortress to get some more of that good fortress loot and enough wither skulls for another wither, cause why not? I also traded with this piglin again to see if I could get anything good, and was rewarded with 4 ender pearls and 1 obsidian, which was definitely going to be handy later on. And by day 63, I had finally conquered the nether fortress. Now that I had enough blaze rods, it was finally time for me to set my eyes on the end dimension. However, if the nether taught me anything, it was that my armor sucked. So on day 64, I began making my preparations for the end fight by getting myself a level 30 enchantment table. The only hard material to get was obsidian, but luckily the lava I collected from my lava farm and the lava I found in the nether fortress chest area was enough when combined with that one obsidian I got from trading. With that done, all that was left to do was to upgrade my gear and grind for XP. And while I did that, I leveled up some cleric villagers for pearls, crafted some fireworks, got some books for my future elytra, chopped down some trees for bridging, got myself a sickle touch pickaxe, and killed some phantoms to brew some slow falling potions. And by day 67, I finally had my hands on a pretty good set of armor, all with mending, meaning that it was finally time to set off for the stronghold. Except I didn't, because I realized phantoms can hit me off my bridge at night. So after a quick nap, I continued my journey as if nothing had happened, and after bridging for around 800 blocks, I found literally nothing. I thought I was being delusional or something, but even after using up most of my Eyes of Ender and going near the void, this really was where the stronghold was supposed to be at. Like Biojon, if you were going to make a Skyblock map, why would you change the location of the stronghold? Like, why? I was so dumbfounded that I searched the outpost I found on the way there and the geode near my base to find any clues, only to find nothing. I ended up wasting 2 days and a bunch of resources because of this, and I was so mad that I literally considered doing what every Let's Play Minecraft YouTuber does, which was to cheat. But thankfully, after doing a little bit of research, BioJohn apparently uploaded a video with the coordinates of all these structures, including the stronghold. And when you look at that, it's 2,000 blocks away from my base, which is more than twice the distance I bridged earlier. Why? So to prepare myself for the tiring journey ahead of me, I went back to base and got to work making some extra preparations. One of which was an ender chest since my inventory just wasn't enough to hold 2,000 blocks and my other items. But obviously, I would need 8 obsidian for one, so I expanded my lava farm to make quick work of this task. And since this was still going to take a while, I made sure to replenish myself on a few items like slow falling potions, blocks, and pearls. I also added fire aspect to my sword and expanded my potato farm since I ran out of things to do. And on day 73, I saved myself from boredom when I realized that the Stronghold's portal had a lot of lava. And so on day 74, I began making my way to the Stronghold. Luckily, the bridge I made in my first attempt was in the same direction as the Stronghold, so this didn't take nearly as long as I thought it would. And on day 76, I finally arrived at the Stronghold and took my time exploring it. I know exploring outside of the Stronghold would have made finding the portal a lot easier, but I wanted to look for the chests since the map maker has so far been very generous with them. And by day 77, I finished looting the area and found the portal room. I noticed there was enough lava for another portal, so I set one up to make traveling here a lot easier. Although the remaining lava was not enough for an ender chest, I remembered I had more back at my base, so I quickly went back home and made it. I also decided it would be a good idea to brew some strength and speed pots before returning to the stronghold on the same day. And on day 78, I opened the portal and quickly went inside to fight the Ender Dragon. And while I would love to overdramatize this scene, I'ma be real with you and say that this was a piece of cake. I didn't even come close to death once thanks to my gear and slow falling potions, which really didn't make this fight close at all. In fact, I was bullying it so hard that it literally killed itself out of sheer embarrassment. The Ender Dragon fight is not that difficult, okay? But of course, as weak of a boss as it was, I did make sure to get the egg and the ridiculous amount of XP it dropped before making my way to the outer end for an elytra. And to my surprise, after only minutes of searching, I found an end city with a ship on it. So after slaughtering the structure's residents and hitting a sick water bucket MLG, I got my first elytra in this world. I made sure to add on breaking and mending onto it so it would last longer, then started raiding a bunch of other cities for more shulker shells and armor to hopefully max out my set. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to get brought for in my leggings, but in the interest of time, I decided to go back to the main island. Now at this point of the video, you'd probably think that I'm done. That I'd probably go back home and kill a warden or something. And that's where you're wrong. Remember those wither skulls I collected a long time ago? That's right! I'm going to fight the wither in the end. But not just one, but two at the same time. Why? Because why not? And some of you may think I'm crazy for doing this, and you'd be absolutely right. Looking back on this, I had no idea what was going on in my head. Not only did I severely underestimate the Wither, but I also made four crucial mistakes. The first was thinking that fighting two Withers at the same time was a good idea, but the second one was choosing the end for this battle. You see, while the end was the only place with enough land for me to fight the Withers, they also perfectly camouflaged with the sky, making shooting them really difficult. My lack of netherite armor didn't help either, since the knockback I took from the Withers was a lot more than I expected, throwing off my aim even more. But by far my worst mistake was my lack of healing items. Thankfully, the healing pots from the end ships and the god apples I brought were enough to take down the first wither and get the second to its melee phase. But by then, it was too late. With my remaining health, there was no way I was going to be able to kill the wither, and even if I did, chances are I would die immediately after. To be perfectly honest, I was screwed. I thought I was done for, until I realized one thing. If I died here, I'd have to redo everything from scratch. So with my sanity on the line, I did what any Hive Skywars player would do, which was to run. Look, I know it wasn't the noblest of moves, but it actually worked. The Wither had ADHD or something because I kept attacking an Enderman the moment I ran, giving me a chance to heal up and go in again. And after hitting and running multiple times, the Wither finally fell at some random Enderman's hands. Not the most climactic ending, I know, but a victory is a victory. And after going back home with two nether stars to my name, I finally felt that I was near the end of this challenge. Now usually, 100 days YouTubers would end the video here. After all, I'd already beaten the game and immediately afterwards killed two withers at the same time, which is a feat not many can do in Bedrock Edition, especially on an iPhone. But because I was so efficient with my time, I still had 20 days left, a fifth of this entire challenge. And while thoughts of getting netherite and killing a warden or two did cross my mind, I decided otherwise because for one, I did not want to risk redoing everything, and two, I've already done that before in my first 100 days video. So on day 81, when I returned home, I decided to just relax. I'd been focusing so much on making progress that it felt good to take a breather without any grand plans in mind. But of course, I didn't just AFK during this time. I upgraded my items with the XP I got from the end, then spent the next day sorting the rest of my items. And that's when I had an idea so absurd that would shock anyone who's watched my hardcore series before. I should make a house. For those of you who don't know, it took me more than 200 in-game days to muster the courage to build a house in my hardcore series, something most people get done in their first hour or two of playing the game. And for this video, I figured I would go with a house on top of a floating island to match the theme of this challenge. So to make gathering materials more efficient, I spent days 83 to 84 replacing my cobblestone farm with a stone farm that Silent Whisper designed. But for the farm to be more efficient, I would need a haste beacon and an efficiency 5 pickaxe. I already had enough resources to set up a beacon thanks to my iron farm, but it took me an embarrassing amount of time to do so since I forgot about the roof above my mob farm. But once I figured that out, I spent the rest of day 85 to 86 maxing out the fortune and silk touch pickaxe. And on day 87, I finally used the farm for the first time and was pleased with the results. But of course stone wasn't the only thing I needed for this build. I planned to use oak, birch, spruce, and warpwood for the house, so I spent days 87 to 88 expanding my wood farm to accommodate birch and warp trees. A fun fact I learned during that time was that to spread nether grass, you have to bone meal the block beside it, which was just a weird mechanic I felt like I had to share with you because it's not something you'd normally do. But once that small project was over, I decided to start working on the house to get a basic idea as to how much resources I would need. And unlike my hardcore video, I thought it would be a good idea to freestyle it, which, as you would probably expect, did not go too well coming from a man who spent around 30 in-game days making a hill. I wanted to go with a classic medieval style house since I had some knowledge about it from the billions of YouTubers who've made a video about it before, but contrary to my expectations, it was quite difficult to do so. I spent so much time testing and redoing my designs that by day 94 I was forced to stick with this simple design because I no longer had time to waste. Days 94 to 96 were spent building the roof of the house and adding a few finishing touches like windows and the such. I'm a bit disappointed that my building skills could only get me this far after hours of work, but it was definitely progress from my villager style house years ago. Once that was done, I started working on the island my house would be on top of, and much like my house, it also didn't go that well. For some reason, I thought building the island's dirt top first would be a good idea, but it ended up interfering with the building process of the island's rocky bottom, causing the final output to look like it had fasted for an entire month. To cover up this mistake, I tried making the island look better by adding life to the top section and making a simple bridge to connect my house with the rest of my base. And on day 99, the house was finally finished. Again, I feel like with the time I had, I could have made something better, but overall, not too bad. At this point, I was considering spending the remainder of this challenge doing the interior of the house, but I honestly had enough of building for this entire video, and instead shifted my focus on flexing my wealth to show how far I've come in this world in just 100 days. And what better way to do so than to make two tier 4 beacons? So on day 99, I made two floating platforms in front of my house, then started using all the resources I had accumulated to build my beacons. And unfortunately, even with everything I had, I still came short. I was considering just leaving it like that, but my OCD just wouldn't allow it. And I think it's just poetic that I spent the very last day doing what I've been doing the entire challenge, just grinding. I was so desperate that I harvested my potatoes without replanting them and employed even more farmer villagers to buy them. And luckily, by the night of day 100, I had not only completed my second tier 4 beacon in the Skyblock world, but had also finally reached the end of this tiring challenge, meaning that I could finally rest.